everyone. Welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds, a writing-centered edition, a fandom-centered edition. Delighted on this episode to be talking with the author of Set Sail with Miguel, as well as you have a number of works in places like Creator Magazine. You've worked on characters like The Spirit, and that is author Steven Thompson. Steven, thank you for joining, and thank you for bringing the Flash with you as well.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, great to have you, and glad to be talking with you. By means of a first question, I always like to ask authors this: what led you to this written word? What led you to writing and creating and storytelling?
When I was a kid, somebody asked me, as they always do, what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I'm talking little kid. I was maybe two. And somebody asked me, and I said I wanted to be a writer. And they said, why do you want to be a writer? And it was because of the Dick Van Dyke Show. Because
Ah.
Dick Van Dyke played a writer on the Dick Van Dyke Show, and he always looked like he was having fun at work. So I said, I want to be a writer. So when I was two that Christmas, my parents, who were very supportive always, bought me a typewriter. I didn't even know the alphabet yet, but they bought me a typewriter. There's a photo I have on one of my blogs of me sitting there at Christmas with this typewriter. And it was a real one, not a toy one. So, and eventually, it took me a while, but eventually I got to the point where I was actually able to be a writer. I tried early on to do so right out of high school. And I was the head writer for a local comedy troupe. And then I started my own comedy troupe and I wrote for them. And then I ended up writing questions for radio and a television game show. And then I decided I wanted to be published. So I wrote an article that was rejected all over the place about the monsters, Universal monsters.
Mhm.
And I sent it off and it just kept getting rejected, so I gave up on it. So then I decided I was going to write a book about the people who do cartoon voices. So I
Wow.
came up with a character or a title called Cartoon Character Actors. And I started researching that, and I had files and files and files I still have of doing that. And a publisher decided, hey, that sounds like a great idea. This was around the time the Roger Rabbit movie came out.
Mhm.
And she thought it would be a nice tie-in to do a thing about a book about people who did cartoon voices. So she nursed me along for like 6 months, helped me get interviews set up with a lot of the cartoon voice actors,
Uh-huh.
and then she was fired.
Ah.
And the company merged with another company, as often happens in the book publishing industry,
Mhm.
and they had no interest in this type of book. So I tried another few publishers and they had no interest either. And eventually the whole animation renaissance thing with Roger Rabbit blew over. And so nobody was the least bit interested. So I gave up on that. I had an article published around that same time in an issue of Amazing Heroes.
Mhm.
And then I had a second piece published in a smaller comics magazine called Comics Arena, which they published without telling me or paying me.
Ah.
So I didn't deal with them anymore. And then nothing for years and years and years after that. I didn't even try. And then I lost my job for the first time ever and had to do something. I kept trying to find other jobs and couldn't find any because I was over 50 at that point.
Mhm.
And as much as they can't discriminate, we all know they do discriminate.
Right, right.
When I was a manager, I was told to discriminate. So I understand that. So I sort of reinvented myself by going back to trying to be a writer. It started out slow. I was doing like writing the back matter of a couple of books that other people had written the books themselves. Then I was doing research. Then I was doing proofreading, transcriptions. Um, I did transcriptions for June Foray, who did the voice of Rocky the Flying Squirrel for
Mhm.
her autobiography. And that got me additional transcriptions, and that introduced me to a lot of people who ended up using me to do writing and eventually ghostwriting. And from there, I started slowly getting credits. And next thing I knew, I'm a writer. Not exactly making a great living at it, but it's what I always wanted to do, and it really is fun.
Well, glad that you are getting to do what you always wanted to do, and what a cool story about your parents, your family supporting you and buying you the typewriter, and it just makes such a big difference to have friends and family behind you.
They were always so supportive. And my dad uh, lived to see that first article being published, and he was just thought that was great.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. As you're writing, and especially thinking about like transcriptions and working with people and gathering ideas and information, what's your creative process like?
Oh, it varies literally from time to time,
Yeah.
depending on the situation. I did the autobiography of Kathy Coleman. Uh, I was brought into that uh, project as an editor after a guy she had been working with for several years dropped out. And one of my Facebook friends recommended me to her. And she had already done 40 hours of interviews on cassette tapes. So she sent me all the cassette tapes, and I had to transcribe all of those and then figure out, because sometimes she told the same story in multiple different tapes with
Mhm.
different, different versions, different outcomes, things like that. So I had to figure out how that worked and put it all together and everything. And then talk to her and figure out what went in between and fill
Mhm.
in the in between while writing in her voice. And then going ahead, and I knew her voice really well by listening to all those 40 hours of tapes by that point. Uh, and essentially, the book eventually came out. We self-published it. I designed the cover, and it did very well. But then we got an agent, and we sold it to an actual publisher, and they hired another guy who got her to write some additional stuff for it, and he got me to write some additional stuff for it, and we came out with a wholly revised version, and that version is the one that's still in print. But I mean, I've never done anything like that again, and
Mhm.
yet that was the way I saw to do it at that point. With the McHale book, my co-writer Denny Reese had started the book like 5 or 6 years ago, and he had posted online a few things about it, and I'd sent him some stuff I thought he could maybe use for it. And I managed to track down the pilot film for him, which at the time was hard to find. It's now on YouTube. If you wait long enough, everything's on YouTube. And it got to the point where the book just never came out, and I kept saying, "Hey, I want to read it. Go ahead and finish your book." And he's like, "No, I'm kind of burnt out on it. I don't know if I can finish it at this point. You want to finish it?" So I took it and ran with it, and I took the portions that he already had and added another like 200 and some pages to it. Watched the entire series, and wrote about all the episodes, and then rewrote all of his portions so it didn't sound like each section was written by a different person,
Mhm.
but keeping his basic writing, but just smoothing it so it sounded all like it was one person. So again, totally different way of doing it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love
I,
that
I found this
flexibility.
I found a short story last night, in fact, that I was reading that I had written the opening to in like, I don't know the years, but at some point years ago, I wrote the opening to this. It was based on an old radio show called Richard Diamond Private Detective.
Oh, fun.
And it was going to be a short story for an anthology about old radio show characters. But that book fell through, and eventually the book came out, but they forgot to tell me that they had revived it. So I had not finished the story. When my son was 15, I read it to him what I had done, and he thought, "That's cool. I'll finish it if that's okay with you." So he wrote the entire middle section of the story, and then I came back and wrote the ending of that story. And then again, I went through and smoothed it over so it sounds like it's all cohesive and everything. And it turned out great. And I published that in the book. It's a collection of my blog posts. And I thought, he should write more often, and he's never written anything since.
Cool. Yeah,
He was
wow.
15.
Wow. Yeah, yeah. The writing gene.
Yeah. So,
Yeah,
but yeah, it's different for every process, and I think that's part of the fun of it is you need to find out how do I do it this time.
yeah, yeah. Well, that leads into the question of collaboration because I know writing is a solitary process in many
Mhm.
ways, but I also know your book on McHale is co-authored, and of course, working with magazines, publishers, editors is always a collaboration. So, any words there on what your process is like, or maybe words to folks that are engaging with processes like that that might help them along?
Well, again, it's different in every situation. If I'm working with somebody like Denny, I don't want to like take him out of the equation.
Mhm.
It was his book. So I made an absolute point, even though I ended up writing the most of it, to make sure that his original vision stayed as part of it and how it went. I'm currently working on a book with the actress Ileana Douglas called, well, I can't really say what it's called yet,
Mhm.
but I'm working on that and doing an edit on it. And the point is to make sure it's her book, make sure it stays her book, even though I feel like I am a major part of it and I am editing it and moving things around and adding little bits here and there and little bits of trivia and things like that. But I want it to be her book
Yeah,
because it is her book. As far as the magazines, I've never really had much of an issue with editors. I turn it in, they say this is good, they publish it. I really don't think there's been a single situation where any magazine I've written for has said they wanted any changes,
that's cool.
which is
That's very
great.
cool. I write in academia, so that's always the case, even if I don't think it's going to be.
I did a piece for an academic book on comics a couple of years ago, and they had all of these guidelines and all of these style manuals and everything. Uh, and I just ended up writing it the way I wanted to write it. And I thought, oh, now they're going to make me change all that. And I turned it in and they published it as it was again.
Oh,
Not a
well, there
word
you go.
changed.
Wonderful,
So,
wonderful.
yeah,
It's that voice that you have and the insights.
apparently.
Yeah. Yeah. I need to get my hands on that secret sauce because, like, yeah, we revise and resubmit is the go-to here when
Well,
I'm writing.
I never get any feedback though either. I never get if I have an article published on comics, I never get anybody writing in and saying, "Hey, I really love that article on comics that, Steve Thompson wrote." If I have a regular column in Comic Book Creator, I don't think
Mhm.
anyone has ever commented on it. Um, I've been doing it for like 3 years now, but I assume people like them because they keep publishing them and they keep buying
Yeah.
them from me.
Yeah.
So,
This can be the channel call. Send this man some positive feedback. Send him some good
yeah,
vibes.
yes.
Yeah. Well, this next question, and it's the second to last one, so we can fit in anything else that you'd like. The next question is about pop culture. I'm a big pop culture fan. I'm a teacher. I've seen the effect that, connecting kids with voices that are recent, that are popular, that are interesting can really have. And I'm curious about that influence for you. When did that start, and how has pop culture informed your work?
Oh, let's put it this way. The earliest memory I have is from of the duck on Groucho Marx You Bet Your Life. The duck used
Mhm.
to come down and had the secret word on it, and I would stay up late to watch the show late. I think it was on at 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
And I would stay up to watch it, and I kept waiting for the duck to come down. And I was really disappointed on the episodes where nobody said the secret word, and the duck never came down. But that is the earliest memory that I actually have of watching anything on television. And from there, as I said, I was a huge fan of the Dick Van Dyke Show, still am. Dick Van
Mhm.
Dyke, who turns 99 next Friday.
Yes, yeah. And he just had a video
He's
yesterday
in
as
the
of
new
this
Coldplay
recording.
video. Yeah,
Yeah, and he was talking
it's
about
great.
how lucky he is to get paid to play like and be silly, which is a
Yeah.
great life. Yeah.
One of the projects I'm working on, in fact, right now is called The Films of Dick Van Dyke. because we think of him as a television star with the various different shows he's had, but he had a very small list of movies, but about, I think it's eight of them out of the 13 or so theatrical films he's done were all very well known for one reason or another. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, um, Cold Turkey, uh, I can't think of it. Mary Poppins, that was it.
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, I had a Mary Poppins poster on my wall for years, and then when my son was born in 1996, we put it on his bedroom wall too. That was one of the earliest movies I remember seeing. So it's always been there. To me, the pop culture has been everything. One of the blogs that I did was, well, two of the blogs I did were my high school journals that
Hmm.
I posted online, matching the same day, uh, although many, many years later. This was from like 74 and 76. I didn't keep one in 75 for some reason. And there's very little, I started these because of a high school project, but there's very little in there about high school. There's nothing about classes. I never had any problem with classes, never had any homework. It just, went, did the work, and came home. But I didn't go to the football games. I didn't go to the dances. I didn't do any of that. So 90% of these journals are about pop culture. They're about the movies I saw, the television shows I watched, the records I bought, and all of that, all through the 70s, influenced me to the point where I think that is my prime influence, really. I created a character once as I started to get older called Old Pop Culture because I was interested in old pop culture and I was going to play the part of old pop culture.
Nice, nice. Love it. Yeah. Yeah. With the voice and everything.
Oh yeah, got to do the voices.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was actually my dream job was not being a writer. As I grew up, my dream job was doing cartoon voices.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That
But
totally
that
tracks
never
with your
happened.
book idea too, which I think is great.
Yeah, I did. I took a seminar with June Foray actually in San Diego at Comic-Con one year. She offered them every year, and she gave out lists of agents and all this kind of thing, and told how to do demo tapes. So I came back and I made a demo tape, and I thought it was really good, and nothing happened. I took acting classes locally for doing commercials and things like that. Uh, and they made us burst into a room shouting Shakespeare and everything because they said you never know when a commercial might want you to act,
Hmm.
not just read a line. So it was great. It was great fun, but nothing ever came of it. So
There's still time. There's still
no,
time.
eventually I started losing my teeth, sadly, and can't do all the voices I used to do.
Oh,
So,
gotcha. Gotcha.
but I can still do some of them,
That's
Sonny.
a that's a good one. That is a good one. Yeah,
Yeah, I
as a
do voices
teacher.
all the time. Yeah, we did. My wife and I were for 25 years, we were the repertory company for the old time radio convention in Cincinnati.
Uh,
So we every year we would go in and originally we would audition for parts and after a while because they would do the recreations on stage of the original radio shows with some of the original stars. And we would go in every year and audition originally, but after a while it got to the point we'd go in and they say, "Okay, I want you to do this part and this part and this part."
hmm.
In fact, the only review I ever got for my acting was when I played a Cairn Terrier, a dog like the one in The Wizard of Oz, in an episode of something I can't think of the name of at the moment. And the Cairn Terrier caught the bad guy by biting him. And I got a review in a national magazine that said a spirited performance by Steve Thompson as the dog.
There you are. There you are.
But we got to do for 25 years. I got to go in. I played a robot. I played a teenage boy a lot. I played gangsters. I played cowboys. All of this usually opposite actual stars that I grew up with. Like as a kid, one of my favorite westerns was Sugarfoot with Will Hutchins, and
Mhm.
Will Hutchins was one of the stars they brought in one year, and I got to play his boss. I was a mob boss, and he was my muscle guy.
How
So
very cool.
yeah,
Yeah,
but
those
that was the closest
connections.
I came to doing that. So instead, I did the writing.
Yeah, yeah. that is very, very cool. I don't know a lot of people that can say that they've done voice work and connected with actors from their childhood. So that's quite amazing.
Well, the main actor that they had every year was Bob Hastings, who would come to the Cincinnati conventions. And Bob
Yeah.
Hastings was on McHale's Navy. If I had ever had a clue that I would someday write a book about McHale's Navy, I would have grilled him about stuff. As it is, he would talk about it either to the people or with me personally. And I didn't bother to remember it all because I never knew I'd need to know it.
Such is life. Such is life. Oh,
I dedicated my part of the book to him anyway.
yeah. I first became aware that there were actors doing voices, I think, with WB animation and like the Batman animated series in the 90s and some of those things, which was not too long removed from that Roger Rabbit time period.
And of course, Bob Hastings was on the Batman series too.
Yes, Commissioner Gordon. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
That was during the period that I knew him, and he would tell me all about it when every year when he would come to the convention. And I just thought, wow, that's so cool. My
Yeah.
son, by the way, when he was about one, maybe two, we're watching Tom and Jerry cartoons, and Tom says something in one of them. He didn't usually talk. And my son turns to me and says, "Who does his voice?" And I'm like, "You're not supposed to know that it's not them doing their own voices. Find that out later." And I said,
He just
"Besides, I don't
knew.
know."
He had already peered through the fourth wall.
Yeah, he's good.
Yeah. Well, if I am a listener out there, you mentioned you have an ongoing column and blog posts. Where are some places that I might connect with you and read some of your work and even hear some of your work if it's around in the world?
Well, I've done 23 blogs since 2005. 13 of them are still up, although 12 of those are inactive, but I keep them up because there's a whole bunch of good reading on them.
Hmm.
My main blog is called Book Steve's Library, so named because when we bought this house, like most Americans, we eat in front of the TV. So we turned the dining room into a library with 30 bookcases and several spinner racks all around the edges of the room. And so I named the blog Book Steve's Library, and that is still active. I posted on that like 2 days ago. But 12 of the others are still up as well. I've got one dedicated to Wally Wood, the comics artist. I've got one, the two high school journal blogs are still up. Those were bizarrely popular. When I did the first one, I woke up one morning and I had America Online at the time as my opening screen. I turned on my computer and there was my face staring back at me from America Online because they chose me as the blog of the week.
Ah,
So
wonderful.
millions of people saw this. A number of celebrities wrote to me and said that this was their new favorite blog and recommended it to other celebrities, minor celebrities, but I knew who they were. And I was interviewed by a magazine in England about it, and there still are reports online from Germany, Iceland, Japan, and somewhere else interesting like that, all about my high school blog and how I'm putting this nerdy high school blog online, uncensored and annotated with new updates about the things I was writing about. So that surprised me. And we tried to do a book version of that. We couldn't kickstart it, didn't quite make enough. Um, so I never did get around to the book version of it. But a lot of people had wanted me to do a book version of that. But anyway, those are still up as well if anybody wants to read them. And various other blogs are up. But I have a regular column in Tomorrow's Comic Book Creator, and I write occasionally for Back Issue for Tomorrow's. We've got one article coming up right after the first of the year, and another coming up later next year that I haven't actually finished yet for them. I occasionally have written for Alter Ego, Roy Thomas's Alter Ego,
Mhm.
but the big article that he literally commissioned me to write has not been published. I talked to him last year about it. This was like 5 years ago. Talked to him last year. He says he just hasn't found a place to fit it in yet. So it may still come out eventually. Who knows? And Other than that, there's a couple of videos on YouTube that have the comedy troupe that I used to write for and my terrible acting of one of my own sketches. Um, and what else? There's other places. Oh, books. I have books out. Yeah. The
Nice.
Set Sail with Mikhail. Did a book on Maverick a couple of years ago that I co-wrote. I started out just doing typing project for the author that was doing the Maverick book. And then he lost interest and passed it on to another author. And then she turned hers in, and I was presented the whole thing to edit. And as I was editing it, it's another case of I started adding more and more to it. And they both decided I should be co-author on that one too.
So
So,
I see it over your shoulder right over there.
yes, exactly.
Hmm.
And I actually did I think it's also in the picture there somewhere, a romance novel last year with an old friend of mine. She had hired me to edit it again. And this was her second book. And I gave her a lot of suggestions on writing tips and everything. I've mentored a number of writers at this point. And ultimately, she said my name needs to be on that. So I did a feminine version of my name, Stephanie Tom,
Nice,
on that
nice.
one. And it's probably the only romance novel I'll ever write, but at the same time, it turned out pretty well. Uh, so yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, yeah, a very wide-ranging career, very cool. Anything that you want to throw in that we've looked over before we close out?
Well, no, not that I can think of anything.
All right, all right.
Yeah, it's just it's been fun. It's like I said, it's what I've always wanted to do, and I had to take early retirement a couple of years ago during the pandemic because a lot of the people that I was doing editing and proofreading and everything for, they kind of went out of business, so they weren't hiring me anymore. But then everything picked up again in the last year or so. So now, as my wife puts it, I'm busier now than when I was working full time. Since I work from home, I sleep like 5 feet away from here because I have to sleep with a BiPAP machine.
Mhm.
And so I get up in the morning, I stumble over here, the computer comes on, and next thing you know, I'm working 5 minutes later, you know. Yesterday morning, I woke up at 3:30 in the morning and I was working on Ileana Douglas's new book to try and get it done in time. So yeah, it's fun. I just wish I was able to make more of a living actually at it.
Yeah,
But these days, unless you have an actual bestseller, you're not really, it's just going to supplement you.
yeah, yeah. Well, and that is good to know for folks in the careers out there that are checking out writing. Definitely, it's a passion of mine, but same, it's very much a supplement. So, um,
Yeah,
yeah.
novels are not something that I tend to write. As I say, I co-wrote the romance novel, and there's been a couple other ones, a fantasy novel about 10 years ago. And we actually, in order to do the fantasy novel, a friend of mine, a former customer of mine when I worked at the bookstore, wrote this fantasy novel, and she hired me to edit it. We actually rented a hotel room, so we would just, have the quiet and sat there for the entire time we had the hotel room working on it and got the entire thing done by the next day. And she
Nice.
published that, and that turned out pretty well. But novels in general, I tried that NaNoWriMo a couple of years ago. I was writing a time travel novel, and it
Mhm.
was going great. But then I developed a toothache and had to miss for a couple of days because I couldn't concentrate. And you have to do like 6,000 words a day, which isn't really a lot. But I was so far behind that I gave up on it and never finished that either. So I've got drawers full of stuff I've started but never finished.
Those threads are out there when the inspiration comes.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, a wonderful conversation with you. Thank you for responding to my invitation and glad to have you back anytime.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been fun.